In the parched summer heat of 1885, Cooper Coop McAllister trudged into the dusty frontier town of Sagebrush Creek with nothing but a battered saddlebag, a horse on its last breath, and a heart weighted by regret. He was a cowboy who'd lost everything: family, land, youthful dreams, and even hope itself. But the local rumor whispered of a peculiar auction one that sold not possessions but companionship. There, under the gaze of crooked dealers and desperate townsfolk, his last 2 silver coins became the turning point of a lifetime. By dawn the next day, a lonely widow would become his wife, and Coop would discover the love he never knew he needed. Cooper McAllister's boots sank into the dry earth with each weary step. Overhead, the sun blazed mercilessly, and the Montana plains seemed to stretch into oblivion. With a cracked canteen strapped around his shoulder and his old horse, Grayson, ambling at his side. Coop tried to recall the last time he'd felt a cool breeze against his face. He hadn't meant to end up in Sagebrush Creek. In fact, he hadn't meant to end up anywhere in particular. A wandering soul, he chased rumors of ranching jobs from territory to territory until each lead fizzled out. He still remembered the day he left the remains of the McAllister family ranch. A bank foreclosure sign hammered into the ground like a cruel marker of his failure. He had resolved then in the swirling dust that he wouldn't return until he had enough money to reclaim the land that was stolen from him by unscrupulous lenders. Word had spread across the frontier that Sagebrush Creek was booming, an odd thing for a place out on the edge of nowhere. Some claimed gold had been found in a nearby river, while others said a prosperous cattle baron named John Chisholm was looking for new ranch hands. Coop latched on to that rumor as if it were a floating plank in a shipwreck. Now, after a week's journey, he found himself limping into a town that looked just as worn and hardscrabble as any other he'd passed through. Sagebrush Creek had all the typical trappings: a main street lined by a saloon, a blacksmith, a general store, and a handful of boarded-up buildings boasting more dust than promise. He made his way to the local saloon, the Broken Spur, hoping the rumor about John Chisholm was more than just hot air. His entrance was met with sidelong glances from the patrons, miners, ranchers, and drifters. A few recognized the brand of desperation etched into his features. They had it themselves. Taking a seat at the bar, he asked the bartender, a thick-set man with a gold tooth and a drooping mustache, about work. The bartender sniffed, shrugged, then pointed to a tattered flyer nailed to the wall. It read, "Hands wanted at the Hastings Ranch. Good pay." Coop's heart lifted just a little. Hastings was no Chisholm, but it might be something. He downed a glass of water, couldn't even afford whiskey, and stared at the notice like a man tempted by salvation. A flicker of movement by the window caught his eye. A slender woman, wearing a worn shawl, peered in. Her eyes held a sadness beyond measure, as though she'd glimpsed the cruelties of life and carried them alone. When their gazes locked, she vanished like a ghost. It left Coop unsettled, but intrigued. Little did he know that fleeting moment was a harbinger of something greater, something that would shake his world and force him to decide just what he stood for. For all his misfortune, Coop was about to be offered a chance in the most unorthodox of ways to start anew. The next morning, Coop woke to the chorus of roosters and the cawing of scavenger birds. He set out in search of work, trudging through the uneven dirt road that served as Sagebrush Creek's main drag. Dust swirled in the early sunlight as wagons rolled by, carrying produce and supplies. A sign at the far end of town read Mercantile and Auction, and below it a smaller board promised Today Only Auction at high noon. Curiosity pricked at him. He'd attended livestock auctions before even helped sell off the last of his own father's cattle. But something in the hush around this particular event felt different. The people who gathered outside the mercantile spoke in clipped whispers, as though discussing a scandal they were loath to voice too loudly. When noon arrived, Coop followed a small crowd into a wide barn-like structure at the back of the mercantile. He expected to see livestock pens. Instead, he found a makeshift stage at one end, fronted by wooden benches filled with men of every age and station. Ranch hands, miners, drifters, and a few local storekeepers. The tension was palpable. On stage stood a stern, lean man wearing a bowler hat, introduced as Graham Tate, the auctioneer. Before Coop could make sense of it, Tate launched into his pitch. "Gentlemen of today, we have an opportunity that cannot be found anywhere else in the Montana Territory. We have here widows and women of the township fallen on hard times, seeking an arrangement for mutual benefit. This is not about impropriety. This is about survival. A chance for these ladies to find a home and for you, gentlemen, to find a companion, a helper, perhaps a wife. The bidding starts at $1. An undercurrent of murmurs spread through the barn. Coop felt his stomach turn. He'd heard rumors of widow auctions in the harsh corners of the frontier, but never had he imagined stumbling upon one. It smelled of desperation and exploitation, a last-ditch attempt for women who'd lost everything to find security. Still, the men in the audience wore expectant faces, some maliciously eager, others resigned, and a few even sympathetic. One by one, the women were paraded onto the stage. Some older, some heartbreakingly young, each with hollow eyes and tattered dresses. The bids were meager, but even so, a handful of coins or a promise of support was better than starvation or living in constant danger. The men shouted out amounts, sometimes glancing at each other in challenge, more often sizing up the women like cattle. Coop shifted uncomfortably. He clutched the little money he had left, a pitiful sum of 2 silver coins, and wondered if he'd ever stoop to something like this. But then he remembered the woman he'd seen at the saloon window. Her haunted gaze. Was she among these desperate souls? At the far edge of the barn, a figure stepped forward onto the stage. It was indeed her, the mysterious woman from the day before. Her name was called out by the auctioneer. Lillian Carter, the widow. Carter in dire need of a supporter who will open the bidding. And in that instant, the air seemed to thicken as Coop's heart beat louder than any thunder he'd heard riding the plains. Little did he know that single moment would shape the rest of his life in ways he never could have imagined. Lillian Carter stood on that makeshift stage, trembling hands clasped before her. Her chestnut hair hung in a loose braid, and her dress, once a lovely shade of blue, was now sun-faded and threadbare. In another life, she might have drawn eyes at a formal ball or turned heads, strolling through a prosperous town. But here and now, desperation framed her every move. The auctioneer reiterated her plight with a theatrical flourish. Mrs. Carter is recently widowed, left with debts she cannot pay. She seeks a man of honor with the means to offer shelter and stability. Who will open at 50 cents? A hush fell. A few men coughed nervously, uncertain if they wanted to take responsibility for a widow's burdens. Others sized her up, calculating what use she might have on a homestead. Could she cook, so tend livestock? Coop stood rooted to the spot. He'd never intended to participate in such a spectacle. But seeing Lillian, he felt a pang of empathy that cut through his own misery. She lowered her gaze, trying not to show the tears brimming in her eyes. And in that silent moment, Coop recognized something that stirred him to the core. Her fear mirrored his own. He had lost so much, was on the brink of losing his last shred of dignity. She, too, was in a free fall. A man in the second row finally spoke. 50 cents, his voice carrying a rough edge. A hush followed. Then another voice. 75. The tension grew as the bids inched upward. Lillian struggled to keep her composure. She glanced around the barn, her vision blurring with tears and sweat. Then her eyes landed on Coop, who stood near the door. He was no wealthy cattle baron, that much was clear from his sun-bleached shirt and dusty boots. But in his gaze, she saw not lust or greed, only compassion. Maybe even kindness, if such a thing still existed in this place. The bids stalled at $1, and the auctioneer glanced around for takers. $1 do I hear, $1.50, $1.25. Another man, one who wore an arrogant smirk and smelled of trouble, raised the bid to $1.20. His name was Billy Rourke, a known gambler. Lillian visibly flinched, as though she recognized Rourke and dreaded his interest. Coop felt his jaw tighten, the sense that she was leaping from a frying pan into a roaring fire if she ended up with that leering scoundrel. Finally, with a boldness that startled even himself, Coop cleared his throat and lifted his hand. 2 silver coins. He didn't even know how much that amounted to in the frantic confusion of the bidding. It wasn't much, certainly not enough to truly rescue someone from a lifetime of troubles. But it was all he had left in the world. And if it bought her a chance at avoiding the gambler's clutches, maybe it was worth it. Silence washed over the barn. Graham Tate, the auctioneer, eyed Coop suspiciously. Going once? Going twice? Sold to the gentleman at the back for 2 silver coins. Lillian's eyes locked onto Coop's. She tried to read his thoughts, to understand if he was an opportunist or a savior or both. All she knew was that in a matter of minutes, she had been spoken for by a stranger who wore kindness on his face but sorrow in his soul. And so with 2 battered coins, Coop McAllister and Lillian Carter set in motion a series of events that would challenge them in ways neither had ever expected. For Lillian carried a heavy secret that had already destroyed 1 life, and if Coop wasn't careful, it would destroy his, too. The barn erupted in anxious murmurs as Coop walked forward, his heart pounding like a blacksmith's hammer. He placed the 2 silver coins into Graham Tate's outstretched hand. The transaction felt surreal, morally tangled, yet also driven by a compulsion he couldn't fully articulate. In Lillian's face he saw relief blended with apprehension. "Thank you," she whispered, hardly audible above the ambient chatter. Her voice trembled, and her eyes brimmed with confusion. She was grateful not to have ended up with Billy Rourke, but what awaited her under Coop's uncertain roof, Tate quickly ushered them off stage. "Congratulations," he said, flatly, barely concealing his disdain for such a paltry sum. "You can settle the formalities next door. Judge Markham is waiting to officiate if you wish to formalize the arrangement. Some men prefer a contract, others go for a proper wedding. That's between you and Mrs. Carter here." Coop blinked in astonishment. A wedding. He'd initially assumed it would be some form of indentured servitude, a caretaker arrangement. But Lillian's posture stiffened, and a faint color rose to her cheeks. Clearly this was more complicated than he'd bargained for. Outside, the bright sun dazzled Coop's eyes. He and Lillian stood awkwardly on the street as folks filed out of the mercantile and auction behind them. Most hurried off, wanting nothing to do with the odd pairing. A few onlookers cast judgmental or curious glances. Billy Rourke passed by with a sneer, muttering something under his breath, something about how Coop would regret stepping in. As they watched him go, Lillian turned to Coop. "I'm not certain how this works. I was told that whoever bid would have first right to marry me if that's your wish. But if you'd rather just let me go, or keep this as a contract of labor." Coop held up a hand. "Ma'am, I don't pretend to know what's right. I only know I couldn't stand by and watch you get handed over to that gambler. I have no real means to support a wife. My life's been nothing but hardship lately." He swallowed hard. "But I'd never turn you out. Let's talk to the judge. Find out what's what." They walked in silence to a rickety wooden building that served as Sagebrush Creek's courthouse. Inside, the smell of old paper and dust filled the cramped office. Judge Markham, an elderly man with a stooped back, greeted them with a patient if weary gaze. "You must be the new couple," he said, pushing his spectacles higher on his nose. "I've overseen many such arrangements for widows in these parts. Hard times call for hard measures." Lillian stared at the floor while Coop explained in halting words that he had no immediate plans. He only wished to ensure Lillian's protection. The judge offered a slight nod. "I can draw up a marriage certificate or a caretaker contract, whichever you decide. But be warned, a mere caretaker arrangement may not keep certain vultures at bay. If your aim is to protect Mrs. Carter, a legal marriage might carry more weight." The judge's words hung in the air, thick with implication. Lillian's eyes drifted to meet Coop's, brimming with equal parts hope and trepidation. Her secret weighed heavily on her heart, but she didn't know how to voice it yet. And Coop, for his part, recognized in that quiet instant that perhaps he was willing to do more than just save her from unscrupulous men. Maybe, just maybe, he wanted to save himself from his own isolation. "All right," Coop said, softly, barely believing his own voice. "Let's do this properly." And so, with a few signatures and a solemn vow spoken under flickering lamplight, Cooper McAllister and Lillian Carter sealed a fate neither of them could have predicted. By the time they stepped out onto the street again, the sun casting long shadows in the late afternoon, they were husband and wife, bound by a promise forged in desperation, yet teeming with unexpected possibilities. The makeshift wedding concluded with startling abruptness. One moment, Coop and Lillian were strangers in a courthouse. The next, they were legally bound for life. Judge Markham's pen scratched across the marriage license, and then with a thin smile he pronounced them husband and wife. No guests, no fanfare, just the scribble of ink and the haunting echo of destiny taking shape. They left the courthouse in quiet disbelief. The late afternoon sun cast long rays across the dusty street, gilding every speck of swirling dust in a surreal glow. Coop felt the subtle weight of the marriage certificate in his breast pocket, a piece of paper that now changed everything. They found temporary lodging above the general store, a single cramped room with a creaking bed and walls so thin you could hear the neighbors' every sigh. The room looked barely fit for one person, let alone two newlyweds unsure of how to proceed. Lillian perched on the edge of the bed, smoothing her worn dress as if trying to quell the tension in the fabric itself. "Thank you," she whispered, eyes downcast. "For what? For saving me from that gambler, from a future even more uncertain than this one." She paused, searching for the right words. "And for the kindness you've shown me, even though you had no reason to." Coop stuffed his hands into his pockets and offered a tight-lipped smile. I didn't do much. Just spent my last coins is all. That's a lot, Lillian said softly. Their conversation faltered, overshadowed by the magnitude of their circumstances. Cooper removed his hat, revealing a thatch of brown hair flattened by sweat. He set it on a small table, along with the few personal possessions he carried. Meanwhile, Lillian glanced around, noting the single pillow, the chipped basin for washing, and a solitary dresser that wobbled on uneven legs. She cleared her throat. "I'll sleep in the chair tonight, if that's all right." Coop looked at the battered armchair in the corner. It was barely wide enough to hold a single occupant comfortably. He shook his head. "No, I'll take the chair. You can have the bed." "I might be scrawny, but I've slept in worse places. Barn floors, rocky trails, you name it." They stared at each other, a wordless pact forming. This arrangement was one born of necessity, not romance. Yet beneath the surface a current of relief and possibly gratitude flowed. Night descended quickly. Through the thin walls they heard a drunken brawl in the hallway, the sobs of someone grieving and the constant shuffle of boots on creaking floorboards. Sagebrush Creek, for all its promises of fortune, was a rough place to spend your first night as newlyweds. Finally, Lillian forced out an unsteady laugh. "I never imagined I'd be married again, especially not like this." Coop nodded, leaning back against the stiff chair legs splayed out. "Life on the frontier doesn't care much for how we imagine things," he said. "Only that we survive." They lapsed into silence, both lost in their own storm of thoughts. The lantern flickered, casting shadows on the walls like dancing phantoms. Neither had the faintest idea of what lay ahead, but each silently clung to the hope that tomorrow might be kinder. And so in that cramped, dusty room, an unlikely pair found themselves on the cusp of a future no one least of all themselves could have predicted. They didn't yet know that their union forged in desperation would soon be tested by betrayal, hidden pasts, and the relentless cruelty of the frontier. But if there was one thing they had in common, it was the sheer will to endure. Morning broke with the sound of footsteps clomping in the hallway. Coop woke stiff-necked and achy, having dozed off in the chair with his hat tipped over his eyes. The first thing he noticed was the absence of Lillian in the bed. Alarm rippled through him until he spotted her by the window, gazing at the dawn light shimmering off the dusty street below. She turned at the rustle of movement. "Couldn't sleep," she murmured. "Bad dreams." Coop nodded, removing his hat and rubbing his eyes. "I'm sorry if I snored." A ghost of a smile curved her lips. "You didn't." They slipped into a fragile sense of domesticity as Lillian set water to warm on the small stove for tea. She rummaged through a cloth bag she'd carried with her, producing a tin of dried herbs. "It's chamomile," she explained. "Might help you with the aches in your neck." Coop accepted the offering, oddly touched by her gesture. In the faint glow of sunrise, she looked different. Her features softened her eyes, a stormy hazel reflecting a guarded hope. It struck Coop that she was younger than he'd first assumed, perhaps no older than his own 26 years. They sipped the tea in companionable silence. Finally, Coop broached the topic he'd been dreading. "You mentioned you're a widow. If you're comfortable, could you tell me what happened?" Lillian's hand trembled around her tin cup, and she fixed her gaze on the swirl of herbs. "His name was Samuel Carter. We married when I was 17. We had a small homestead near the Dakota border. It was tough, but it was ours." Her voice quivered, and Coop sensed the old wounds opening. "We tried to start a family, but it never happened. Then last winter, Samuel took ill. Pneumonia. We had no money for a doctor. She paused, swallowing hard. I did what I could, but it wasn't enough. He died in my arms. Coop set his cup aside, unsure how to comfort her. I'm sorry, he offered, simply. She nodded. That left me with debts I didn't even know existed. Samuel had borrowed money from a man in Sagebrush Creek to buy supplies. I couldn't pay, so I came here to... Well, you saw how it all turned out. His heart clenched at her story. I wish I had more to give. She looked up, meeting his gaze with surprising intensity. You've already given me something no one else would a chance. They shared a moment of mutual understanding, that for all the awkwardness of their union, they were each other's only lifeline. Then Lillian's expression clouded, and her voice lowered to a near whisper. I need to tell you something else. There are rumors. People say my husband's death wasn't natural. They said I... Her voice broke off, a tremor coursing through her. Coop felt his blood chill. They said you what? They said I helped it along. Poisoned him. I didn't. I swear on my life, I didn't. Samuel was weak from pneumonia. But once a rumor like that starts, it never stops. Some folks in town believed it, and the debt collector used it against me. Coop's jaw tightened. He understood how quickly gossip could spread, how merciless a small town could be. I believe you, he said firmly. Then, remembering Billy Rourke's sneer, he realized how precarious their situation might be. We'll figure this out. Together. For a moment, tears glistened in Lillian's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. Then she stood, straightening her shoulders. Thank you. I suppose that's all I can say for now. Coop nodded, finishing his tea in one gulp, the hot liquid burning his throat. He had no illusions that life would suddenly become simple. In fact, the rumor that Lillian might be a murderer only added another layer of peril to their tenuous arrangement. But something within him, a spark of defiance, or maybe just plain stubbornness, refused to let that deter him. He rose to his feet, grabbed his hat from the table, and smiled at Lillian with a quiet resolve. Let's go find work. We both need it. And so they set out side by side, stepping into the dusty morning light of Sagebrush Creek. Unknown to them, the shadows of Lillian's past, fueled by whispers and accusations, were about to make their presence known in the most brutal way possible. By midday, the scorching sun pounded Sagebrush Creek with unrelenting heat. Coop and Lillian spent the morning visiting various ranches on the outskirts of town, inquiring about work. It didn't take long to realize that opportunities were scarce, and the rumors about Lillian's reputation had already started to swirl. Ranch owners stiffened at the mention of her name, muttering excuses about having no positions available. Exhausted and dispirited, they made their way back to the main street. Lillian pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders, as if trying to ward off not just the sun, but the scornful glares from passers-by. A cluster of women who recognized her whispered behind gloved hands, their condemning stares piercing through her thin resolve. Coop placed a comforting hand on her elbow, guiding her to the small diner, Ella's Cookhouse. The tantalizing aroma of frying bacon and fresh bread wafted into the street. Inside, they found a table in the corner. The simple act of ordering lunch 2 bowls of stew felt like a luxury given Coop's scanty funds. Halfway through the meal, the door swung open with a violent crash. Billy Rourke strode in, flanked by 2 cronies whose expressions ranged from smug to menacing. Coop tensed, setting his spoon down carefully as if bracing for a fight. Rourke spotted them immediately. "Well, look at that," he drawled loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "The new Mr. and Mrs. McAllister." He stalked over, leaning heavily on the table. His breath reeked of whiskey, and his eyes glinted with malice. "You sure are quick to throw your life away on a black widow, Cowboy." Coop's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice low. "I don't want any trouble, Rourke. Let us be." Rourke's lip curled. "Trouble? I'm not the one wedded to a woman rumored to murder her husband. But maybe you like living dangerously." He scoffed. "Heard you were sniffing around for work. Good luck. Folks here don't take kindly to rumors of that sort." Lillian's face drained of color. She tried to shrink into herself, but Rourke reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Hey there, sweetheart. You poison one husband, might as well poison another, right?" A wave of cold fury surged through Coop. He shot up from his seat, snatching Rourke's wrist in a vice-like grip. "Let go of my wife," he growled. Rourke and Coop locked eyes. The diner fell silent. Ella, the owner, stood behind the counter, clutching a ladle with trembling hands. The tension was palpable enough to slice with a knife. "Is that how you want it?" Rourke hissed, pulling free and grabbing at the gun on his hip. In a lightning move, Coop's hand shot to his own holstered revolver. Both men stood in a standoff, guns half drawn. Lillian let out a small cry as patrons ducked under tables. But in that moment of simmering chaos, a voice rang out from the doorway. "That's enough." All eyes turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered lawman with a U.S. Marshal's star pinned to his vest. He wore a serious expression and carried an air of calm authority that filled the room. "We don't need no gunfight in Miss Ella's diner," he said, stepping forward. Rourke sneered but released his grip on his weapon. "Marshal Evers," he spat. "Always in the way." Marshal Evers fixed him with a cold glare. "You want to go for your gun outside, I'd be more than happy to oblige. Or you can back off." A tense pause followed before Rourke jerked his head toward his cronies. "Let's go, boys." He turned to Coop, words dripping with menace. "Don't get too comfortable. I'll be seeing you again." With that, they stomped out, leaving the diner in a hush. Coop exhaled slowly, holstering his revolver. Lillian trembled beside him. The marshal kept his gaze trained on them, assessing the situation. "I'd advise you two to keep a low profile," he said. "Rourke's trouble, through and through. Don't give him an excuse to draw on you." Coop nodded. "Thank you, Marshal." Evers tipped his hat. "Name's Marshal Samuel Evers. If you find yourself in a bind, come see me." He eyed Lillian gently. "This town's real fond of rumors, but I don't abide men laying hands on a woman." As quickly as he'd appeared, the marshal departed, leaving Coop, Lillian, and the diner patrons to process the near-violent confrontation. Lillian's hand shook as she reached for Coop's arm, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and fear. "That was close," she managed to whisper, voice cracking. Coop gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "We'll figure out a way forward," he promised, though he wasn't sure how. With Rourke prowling for a fight and the entire town whispering about murder, he realized that protecting Lillian and himself would take more grit and determination than he'd ever mustered before. The afternoon sun hung low as they ventured back onto Sagebrush Creek's dusty main road. Coop felt every pair of eyes on them, every hushed whisper behind drawn curtains. Lillian's gaze remained fixed on the ground as though by not looking at anyone she could avoid their silent judgments. "I hate this," she murmured. "I never asked for all this attention. I just wanted to pay off my debts, maybe find a small place to live quietly." Coop exhaled. "I know. We just need one opportunity somewhere we can start fresh." They turned a corner and nearly collided with a tall, barrel-chested man wearing a broad-brimmed hat. He had the weathered complexion of someone who'd spent years under a scorching sun. Flanking him was a younger man, equally tall though leaner, with a calculating expression. "Pardon me," Coop said instinctively, stepping between Lillian and the strangers. The older man tipped his hat. "No harm done. Name's Charles Hastings. This here is my son, Will." He frowned slightly. "You're Cooper McAllister, right? The fellow who—" He glanced at Lillian, unsure how to complete the sentence without sounding rude. Coop nodded, bracing for another brush-off. "Yes, sir. I've been looking for work. I saw your flyer at the saloon." Hastings studied them both. "Heard some talk. Not sure what to make of it, but I try to judge a man by what I see, not what I hear." He glanced at Will, who offered nothing but a steady, non-committal stare. Coop waited, heart-pounding. This could be their last hope for honest employment. Hastings continued. "I need ranch hands. The work's hard, the pay fair. You look like you know your way around horses. And you," he gestured to Lillian, "can you cook or keep house? My ranch has a bunkhouse that could use tending." Lillian swallowed. I can cook, yes." And so. Anything to be useful. Hastings' expression softened just a fraction. "We can work something out. My foreman, Gus Pendleton, calls the shots day to day. But I'm short-staffed. If you're both willing to put in an honest day's labor, I'm willing to give you a chance." Coop dared not show too much excitement, but relief flooded him. "Thank you, Mr. Hastings. We won't let you down." Hastings nodded. "Come by tomorrow morning, first light. We'll get you settled." Then, tipping his hat again, he and Will continued on their way. Lillian let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. A job. A real job. Coop grinned for the first time in what felt like forever. A real job, he echoed, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Yet as they made their way to the boarding room to gather their meager belongings, Coop couldn't shake the sense of impending trouble. Billy Rourke had threatened them, and the rumor mill was running wild. But for a moment, they had a ray of hope like sunlight piercing the dark clouds that had gathered over their lives. That night, Lillian managed a small smile as she cooked a simple meal of beans and bacon on the stove in their cramped quarters. They ate in near silence, the tension slowly easing with each bite. Tomorrow, they would head to the Hastings Ranch, start anew. And maybe, just maybe, find a sliver of peace in this unforgiving frontier. As they settled in for the night, Coop stretched out on the floor this time, insisting Lillian take the bed again, and found himself thinking of how strange life could be. Just days ago he was a solitary drifter with barely a coin to his name. Now he was a married man, set to start a job on a ranch, all because he'd spent those last 2 silver coins on a woman he hardly knew. Yet despite all the chaos, some hidden part of him dared to believe it might just be the best decision he'd ever made. Dawn broke with a crisp chill in the air as Coop and Lillian arrived at Hastings Ranch. The sprawling property spread out before them lush pastureland, dotted with grazing cattle, flanked by towering pines and rolling hills that glimmered under the early sunlight. A long dirt driveway led to the ranch house, a sturdy 2-story structure, and behind it a collection of barns, corrals, and a modest bunkhouse. Mr. Hastings greeted them near the barn, looking more serious in the morning light. "Glad to see you on time. Gus, show them around." A stocky man with silver-flecked hair stepped forward, tipping his hat. "I'm Gus Pendleton, the foreman. Work starts now." "Mrs. McAllister, we have a kitchen behind the main house. You can meet Mary, the head cook. She'll show you the ropes. Coop, follow me." They parted ways. Coop felt a twinge of anxiety leaving Lillian's side, but her reassuring nod bolstered him. Gus led Coop to the corrals, pointing out tasks. "We need stalls, mucked horses, groomed feed checked. I'll test your riding skills later. Need someone to herd strays back from the ridge." Coop rolled up his sleeves. The day blurred into hard labor, shoveling manure, hauling water, and grooming dusty horses until the sweat poured off him in rivulets. Yet strangely it felt good, honest work that steadied his racing mind. Lillian, for her part, spent the day cleaning and assisting Mary with meals for the ranch hands. Mary was a robust woman with calloused hands and a kindly gaze who immediately took Lillian under her wing. By evening, Coop found Lillian in the ranch's modest vegetable garden, picking beans with Mary. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair escaping its braid, but she smiled a real smile that lit her face in a way Coop hadn't yet seen. During supper they ate with the other hands in the bunkhouse dining room. The men were mostly cordial, though a few eyed Lillian warily. Whispers still clung to her like shadows, but Mary and Gus made sure no one openly harassed her. After the meal, as Coop and Lillian headed to a small room Hastings had cleared for them near the main house, the ranch owner himself appeared. His face was unreadable. Heard from folks in town, he began pausing to choose his words. "They say you, Lillian, might have had a hand in your husband's death." The statement hung in the cool night air. Coop's shoulders tensed, preparing for a confrontation. Lillian's eyes glistened. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice tight. "He died of pneumonia. I tried to save him." Hastings studied her face, then shifted his gaze to Coop. "I don't abide lies on my ranch. If I catch wind you've brought trouble here, I won't hesitate to send you on your way." "Understood." Coop clenched his fists, but forced himself to remain calm. "Understood. But we aren't lying." Hastings gave a curt nod. "We'll see. For now, get some rest. There's plenty more work tomorrow." Once Hastings departed, Lillian exhaled a shaky breath. "Even here, we can't escape the rumors." Coop placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll prove ourselves." His tone was gentle, but firm. "I won't let you face this alone." They made their way inside the small room, which had a single bed, a wooden trunk, and a tiny window overlooking the corral. It was more modest than most newlyweds might hope for, but after their cramped quarters in town, it felt almost luxurious. They settled in the weight of the day's labor, mingling with the heaviness of unspoken fears. Then, just as Lillian was about to drift off, she propped herself on an elbow, concern etched across her face. "There's something else," she whispered, voice trembling. "Something I haven't told you." Coop blinked, his exhaustion mingling with alarm. "What is it?" She swallowed hard. "Samuel. He didn't just owe a small debt. He borrowed money from a dangerous man, someone who threatened to take our land and everything we had. That man was Billy Rourke's partner." Her voice shook at the mention of Rourke's name. If Rourke is still around, it might not just be about me. It could be about the money, too. Coop's stomach twisted. Rourke's hostility made even more sense now. And if the gambler truly believed Lillian had hidden money somewhere, or was somehow responsible for Samuel's death, he wouldn't stop harassing them. This wasn't just idle gossip, they could be in genuine danger. Coop gently took Lillian's hand, feeling its cold tremor. "We'll handle it together. Somehow." He had no plan, no resources, but he had grit, and at that moment, he made a silent vow. He would stand by her, protect her from the vultures circling overhead, and clear her name, even if it meant putting his own life on the line. Outside, the moon rose over the endless Montana sky, illuminating the ranch's rolling fields in silver light. The nighttime hush settled in, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the sigh of the wind in the pines. In that quiet, uneasy moment, Coop and Lillian braced themselves for the reckoning that lay ahead, knowing that sooner or later their fragile peace would be shattered by the secrets they still carried. Days slipped into a tense rhythm at Hastings Ranch. Coop labored from dawn until dusk, quickly proving his worth as a skilled horseman and tireless ranch hand. Lillian's cooking earned quiet praise from the bunkhouse men, and Mary found her an apt helper in the kitchen. Even Charles Hastings began to offer the occasional approving nod, though his watchful eye never seemed to waver. Yet beneath the daily toil and small victories, a sense of foreboding grew. Billy Rourke was spotted in town, stirring trouble, gambling heavily at the Broken Spur saloon, and muttering darkly about a certain cowboy and his black widow wife. The undercurrent of rumor followed Coop and Lillian like a second shadow. Then one crisp morning, as Coop saddled up a horse to ride out and check the far pastures, a ranch hand hurried over, breathless. "Coop, we got trouble near the southern fence line. A group of men is tearing down our fence, claiming it's on their land." Coop frowned. "I'll head out. Let the boss know." He mounted up and galloped across rolling fields toward the commotion. As he crested a small rise, he spotted 3 figures near a half-collapsed fence, and at the center of the chaos stood Billy Rourke, arms folded leering. Coop reined in, dismounting in a swirl of dust. "What do you think you're doing?" Rourke flashed a malevolent grin. "Didn't figure I'd find you here so soon, McAllister." He kicked a broken fence post. "Your boss claims this pasture is his, but I say otherwise. Just settling a boundary dispute." Coop's pulse thundered. "Mr. Hastings has owned this land fair and square for years. Get off his property." The men behind Rourke sneered, one of them spitting a thick wad of tobacco juice onto the ground. Rourke took a step forward, resting a hand on the butt of his revolver. "You telling me what to do, boy?" Coop refused to be intimidated, though every instinct screamed caution. "We can ride back to Hastings and talk this through like civilized folk." No need for Rourke drew faster than Coop expected, leveling his revolver at him. "I think talking time is done. You stuck your nose in my business at that auction, took what was rightfully mine. And I haven't forgotten that you embarrassed me in front of the whole damn diner." Coop's hand hovered near his holster, adrenaline surging. He scanned the fence line for any sign of reinforcements, none. The ranch was a good mile or 2 behind him. "That woman was never yours," Rourke Coop said, keeping his voice steady. "You lost the bid." Rourke let out a sharp laugh. "She owes me more than a few coins. Her dead husband owed me partner or not. I still expect payment. And from what I hear, you two might have stashed the money somewhere." Coop shook his head. "You're delusional." For a moment, time hung, suspended. Coop's gaze flicked to Rourke's finger on the trigger, the slightest tremor threatening to unleash lethal force. The other men looked ready to pounce, their own hands resting on holstered guns. Finally, Rourke snarled, "Tell you what. Throw down your iron, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to cough up what I'm owed." Coop weighed his options. Surrendering meant leaving himself and Lillian at Rourke's mercy, but drawing might spark a deadly shootout. A swirl of dust rose on the wind, stinging his eyes. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed across the fields. One of Rourke's men cried out, clutching his arm. A second shot followed, kicking up dust near Rourke's boots. Coop turned to see Marshal Samuel Evers charging up on horseback, rifle in hand. "Drop your weapons," the marshal bellowed, dismounting fluidly. "Nobody fires another shot, or I'll put you down." Rourke whirled, gun swinging toward the marshal, but Evers was faster. He fired a well-placed shot that sent Rourke's revolver spinning from his hand. Rourke hissed in pain, blood trickling from a bruise on his forearm. The other men, seeing the tables turned, threw their guns to the ground, raising their hands in surrender. Marshal Evers strode forward, eyes blazing. "What did I tell you about stirring trouble, Rourke?" Rourke glared, cradling his wounded arm. "We have a boundary dispute. This is none of your business." Evers snorted. "You have a habit of making everything your business." He eyed Coop with a curt nod. "You all right, McAllister?" Coop exhaled, lowering his half-drawn revolver. "I'm fine. Thanks, Marshal." Rourke, seething, spat onto the ground. "This ain't over." But Evers shoved him forward. "It is for today. Now walk." As they marched back toward town under the watchful eye of the marshal, Coop's mind whirled. Rourke's determination was alarming, driven by greed or vengeance or both. And while the immediate threat had been neutralized, Coop knew that men like Rourke didn't simply fade into the night. A final reckoning loomed on the horizon, and Coop braced himself for the moment it would arrive, knowing that if he didn't handle it once and for all, neither he nor Lillian would ever be safe. The day after the standoff, Hastings Ranch buzzed with subdued excitement. Word spread that Marshal Evers had arrested Billy Rourke for trespassing and assault, but Rourke's bail had already been paid by an unnamed benefactor. He'd be out soon, and the question of how he'd seek his revenge lay heavily on everyone's minds. Despite the tension, Coop and Lillian found themselves pulled deeper into the ranch's daily rhythms. Gus the foreman appreciated Coop's quick thinking under pressure and assigned him greater responsibilities overseeing the horses and riding fence lines to ensure no more mischief occurred. Lillian, meanwhile, discovered her knack for organizing the kitchen and even started a small herb garden near the main house to spice up the meals. During lunch, Mary pulled Lillian aside. "You and that husband of yours seem to be fitting in." She eyed Lillian with a perceptive gaze. "But you're still jumpy as a jackrabbit every time we mention Rourke. Is there something more we should know?" Lillian swallowed carefully, placing a tray of cornbread on the counter. "He's dangerous, Mary. He thinks I'm hiding money my late husband owed him, and he won't stop until he gets it." Mary rested a comforting hand on Lillian's shoulder. "Well, you've got friends here, even if you don't realize it. Gus can be gruff, but he won't stand for bullying. And Mr. Hastings is a tough old cuss. He won't let folks trample his land. You're safe here." Lillian mustered a shaky smile. "Thank you, Mary." That evening, Coop finished his chores and made his way to the edge of the ranch where a small creek trickled through a grove of cottonwoods. He found Lillian there, seated on a fallen log, staring at the setting sun, turning the sky into molten gold. The hush of dusk settled over them, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves. "How are you holding up?" Coop asked, sitting beside her. She offered a tentative smile. "Better. Tired, but Better. He nodded. We've come a long way. A week ago we were strangers in a dusty barn at that wretched auction. A bittersweet laugh escaped her. I know. It feels like a lifetime ago. They lapsed into companionable silence, each reflecting on the twists that brought them here. Finally, Lillian sighed. I wonder if there's a chance for us to actually live like a real married couple, not just an arrangement. Her question stunned Coop. He stared at the water reflecting the dying light. I won't lie. I never expected to be married at all, let alone in this way. But he turned to her voice, quiet. I'm not sorry it happened. Strange as it sounds, I'm grateful. Tears glistened in Lillian's eyes, but she smiled, truly. Smiled. She reached for his hand, their fingers entwining. That simple gesture in the hush of the evening felt like a promise. They had been thrust into this bond by desperation and circumstance, yet here they were forging something real out of the rubble of their pasts. Suddenly, a faint sound shattered the moment hoofbeats thundering across the open range. Coop stood, heart hammering, as a rider emerged from a trail of dust. It was Will Hastings, Charles Hastings' son, reining in hard. His face was ashen. "Coop Lillian," he gasped. "You gotta get back to the ranch house. We just got word Billy Rourke's out on bail. And he's sworn vengeance. Said he's coming for you before sunrise." Coop felt Lillian's grip tighten on his hand. He steeled himself, looking out at the horizon's fading light. The final showdown was coming, and they had precious little time to prepare. As dawn approached, the Hastings ranch moved like a machine in crisis. Armed ranch hands manned key positions. Charles Hastings stood guard on the porch with a shotgun. Coop and Lillian huddled behind the barn, rifles in hand, their nerves stretched thin. Billy Rourke was coming. Around 4 a.m., hoofbeats thundered down the dirt road. Rourke and 3 armed riders appeared through the lantern-lit haze, their horses snorting, their eyes filled with menace. "Come out, McAllister!" Rourke bellowed. "Let's end this!" Hastings stepped forward. "You're trespassing. Turn around now." Rourke laughed cruelly. "Don't pretend this is about land. McAllister owes me, and I always collect." From behind the barn, Coop stepped into the open rifle leveled. "We don't owe you anything. You squeezed a dying man and now want blood." "It ends here." Rourke spat. "Where's your wife? I've got a score to settle with her." Lillian stepped beside. Coop revolver in hand, her voice steady. "Samuel died of pneumonia. I tried to save him. You drove him to debt and despair. You killed him." Rourke snapped. "Liar." He raised his gun too late. A crack rang out. Chaos erupted. Bullets flew. One of Rourke's men screamed and dropped. Coop fired, clipping Rourke's shoulder. Lillian ducked and returned fire, her hands shaking but controlled. Just as the firefight spiraled, Marshal Samuel Evers charged into the yard with the posse rifles blazing. "Drop your weapons," Evers shouted. Rourke turned his gun toward him, but the marshal fired first, knocking the revolver clean from his hand. The rest surrendered immediately. Breathing heavily, Coop lowered his rifle and rushed to Lillian, who was shaken but unharmed. Marshal Evers secured Rourke and his men. "You all right?" he asked. Coop nodded, eyes still on Lillian. "Thanks to you." Charles Hastings approached, shotgun still in hand. "You protected my ranch and my people tonight. If you want it, Coop, there's a permanent place here for you both." Coop looked at Lillian, who managed a trembling but sincere smile. Around them, the ranch hands gathered no longer skeptics but comrades. Whatever doubts they had about Lillian's past, they were gone, burned away in the fire of truth and survival. As dawn broke, golden light spilled across the field, bathing the battered ranch in promise. Rourke was hauled away, his threats silenced. For the first time in weeks, there was peace. Coop slipped an arm around Lillian's waist. "It's over," he whispered. "No," she said, leaning into him. "It's just beginning." And in that quiet morning light, they both knew they'd found something rare, hard-won love, born in the heart of the storm. As the sun climbed higher over Sagebrush Creek, Cooper McAllister and Lillian Carter. Now Lillian McAllister stood hand in hand, surveying the ranch they'd fought to defend. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, the world once again serene. Their journey had begun in desperation and uncertainty, but in the span of a few tumultuous days, they forged a partnership, sealed not just by law, but by mutual sacrifice and undying resolve. If you've been captivated by their story of grit, courage, and unexpected love on the harsh frontier, don't forget to leave a thumbs up. Share this video with fellow fans of epic Western drama and subscribe for more tales of adventure, redemption, and heart. Your support keeps these stories alive and brings us together as a community of dreamers and storytellers. So saddle up, hit that like button, and we'll see you on the next ride into the frontier.